guest with us. Got it. Dana Pohl is our guest today, and thank you, Dana, for joining us. Invocation. I will go ahead and read this.
Jean Ann's going to do it.
Somebody's Jean Ann, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. We need somebody
All right.
God than I am.
There are so many things that we take for granted. Let us not ignore them today. Help us to remember that life is a gift, that our health is a blessing, that today is a new day filled with awesome potential, and that we have the capacity to bring something wholly new and unique and good into this world. Help us to remember to be kind and patient with those who love us and to those with whom we work and interact each day. Teach us to see all the beauty that we so often ignore and to listen to the silent longings of our own souls. Help us to remember to serve others and to spread Kiwanis goodness in our community.
Good. Thank you, Jean Ann. Club announcements. I'm stepping in to preside over today's meeting at the request of our president, Trina Roudabush, who is unable to attend today. I don't see any guests. Steve Robinson joined us. Thank you, Steve. Hi. I'd like to thank two awesome past presidents for their contributions to Kiwanis over the years. Yesterday marked Pat McCrory's 35th anniversary. Pat is the owner of Mediation Roundtable and our liaison to Circle K at the University of Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And Sunday is Mike Halstead's 27th Kiwanis anniversary. Mike is president of Halstead Architects. He's on our foundation board and chair of the boys basketball state finals luncheon. Thank you to Mary Bulk for agreeing to serve as president for the 2023-2024 club year, and Eric Rowland as president-elect. Art Kudroff and Steve Farrow will begin 3-year terms and join me as treasurer, and other directors, Jackie Clancy, Laura Holloway, Chuck Cotterman, and Wendy Paddock, and also Kelly Oles, who will continue as secretary for the club. Appreciation to Nancy Ulrichs, Bill DuBois, and Duke Haddad, and whose term ends on 9/30 of this year. Voting to approve the slate opens next week. Thanks to also to Gene Cease, David Cease, Jean Ann Kirby, Ed Doyle, Katie Harris for joining me for lunch on Monday at Iosa's Garden of Italy. That was this past Monday, the 15th, I guess it was. Our next monthly lunch bunch is Monday 5/19, but that's 6/19. And that may change because the Kiwanis International Convention is that week. Lonnie and I may be taking off Sunday night. We're driving, gonna make a little mini vacation out of it as well. So that date may change, but we've got a schedule right now for the 19th of June. This is a great way to visit with Kiwanians if you're not able to make the Thursday luncheon. A reminder that we won't be meeting next Thursday, but hope to see you at Center Grove Christian Church in Greenwood on Monday, 5/29, to offer support for our friend and longtime Kiwanian member, Tom Dunham, his wife, Patty, beloved wife, Patty, passed away. Showing is at 10, service is at 11. So I hope to see several of you there. Flags for Good founder, Michael Green, joins us as a speaker on June 1st. Please, if you have any, bring a worn or tattered U.S. flag to be retired by American Legion local scouts BSA Troop 303. Exodus refugee visits us at the Columbia Club on June 8th to provide a recap of the $11,000 grant that we provided to them for youth programming and World Refugee Day. Anna Welchel from the Indiana State Fairgrounds will join us on Zoom on June 15th, to talk about some of the exciting things going on at the fairgrounds besides new buildings. The following week, you can sign up for online sessions for the Kiwanis International Convention. All right, so those are our announcements for the.
Roger?
Kelly?
Roger, may I make a quick announcement?
Absolutely.
This is Jeanne, and I just wanted to wish a very happy birthday to Roger on Sunday and ask all of you to please keep him in your prayers. He's having a surgery on Monday, an aortic valve, if it's okay for me to say, and maybe a pacemaker. So please keep him in your prayers, that he and Lonnie, his caretaker, will make it through unscathed, and he'll be home in no time, and he'll be feeling a lot better. So happy birthday and safe time at the hospital on Monday.
Thank you, Jeanne.
Yes.
One other birthday on that same date is Eric Rowland.
Mhm.
We got the same birthday. Thank you. So now let me introduce Dana. Dana Pohl is Director of Community at Uncovered, the nation's largest database of cold cases. I did look on there on the site to make sure my name isn't on there yet. Lonnie always says she's looking for me, but I'm still here. More than 200,000 unsolved cases have gone cold since 1980. Uncovered is where the most passionate true crime enthusiasts can learn from and teach others. At some point, compassion causes entertainment to grow into a need for activism, contribution, and community to solve the stories of real people.
You know, grew up exactly like I did.
Dana is also the creator and host of True Crime P.I, an investigative podcast that explores missing and unidentified persons cases from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. As a founding member of the Uncovered community, Dana's goal is to help find the missing, give the unidentified back their names, and to provide answers to families who have been forced to carry the unbearable burden of not knowing. I can't even imagine.
Me
She
neither.
has a BA in journalism and communications and a master's degree in library and information science. She has been researching the missing and unidentified for 13 years. Dana tells the stories of the missing and unidentified with empathy and respect. Episodes include interviews with law enforcement, family members, expert in the field of forensic DNA and genetic genealogy. Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. At one point in my life, so back in the early 2000s, I was a library director, and I made it a point to speak at the Kiwanis meetings and the Lions meetings and the Rotary. So this brings back fond memories for me. I enjoy listening to your, all the activities you all are doing, and it's such a sense of community. So I just wanted to say it's a little nostalgic for me. So with that said, my goal today is to give you an overview of how Uncovered is helping everyday citizens turn their interest in true crime into advocacy. There is a lot of information I can share, but first, can you tell me one or two questions you would like me to answer today?
That's open to anyone.
Could I ask, this is Nancy Ulrichs. I was wondering, how do you select cases to be featured on your podcast or, in any way to bring them to the public? How do you select them?
Okay, So I can answer that before I'll talk about how I choose them for my podcast. So I'll answer that now. I feel like the cases choose me, if that is, if that's understandable to anyone. There are so many, unfortunately, so many cases of missing and unidentified people. And those are the cases that I stick to in my podcast. So I will, go through databases, look at information. There's a database called NamUs who has missing and unidentified people in it. It's a government database. And I will choose someone who sticks out to me for whatever reason. So the case that I will tell you about later was season 1 of True Crime P.I, and it's about a Jane Doe found in Cobb County, Georgia in 1984. And when I moved here in 2018, that case was still unsolved. So for some reason, when I saw her reconstruction, I thought, I want to dig into this case. I want to give her back her name. So that's really what led me to choose her case, to investigate her case. And that, what was supposed to be 1 episode turned into 7 for various reasons, because I was able to get information from a retired law enforcement officer who shared a ton of information that had not been previously shared. So that's basically how I do it. At Uncovered, when we add cases to the site, they are either requested by family members, they are submitted by the public. So someone knows of a case in their area and wants us to add it to the database. Or they are, like if we know that there's a podcast coming out about a certain case, we want to get that information up so that people have another place to look when they're listening to the podcast. So that's basically how Uncovered does it. The way I do it is really kind of who grabs me, and if I think that there's an investigative angle where I can bring new information to the case.
Is there a big difference between the number of, say, youth under 18 that you search for? Or is that too far back in your criteria?
No, so I look at cases from the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Okay.
So I will, look at any case that's a cold case that is unsolved in those decades. And the reason why I chose those decades is, one, because whenever I started researching the missing and unidentified 13, 14 years ago now, I was really interested in the cases that were, these people could have been my peers, or maybe they would have been the same age as me or whatever. So those drew me in, and they also were the cases that weren't getting a lot of attention. And so I thought, well, I could shed some light on these cases. If I go into the NamUs database and I find a doe that has the same physical characteristics as a missing person or a few missing people, I can compare those. I can look at time of death. I can look at, date missing. I can do all of that kind of research and determine whether or not this could potentially be a good match. So that's really the way I do it. The Uncovered database is a cold case database, meaning a case has to be at least 3 years old. And the reason why we do that is because we don't want to interfere with a current active investigation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Dana before she gets?
I have another one.
Okay.
Is there a part of the country that seems to have more of these cold cases than others? And also, have you ever figured out that there was a serial killer involved? Have you ever put several cases together?
So there are sections or states. Indiana has a lot of unsolved cases. Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, has a lot of unsolved cases. In older cases, you see a ton of those in California in the 70s. And I think that was where, we know a lot of serial killers were operating. And so I think that that's a really good question. It's very dependent on actually, can you connect the dots to determine that? We're still trying to connect the dots on cases from the 70s and 80s that may have been connected to a serial killer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, you have a question? You're muted.
How receptive are the detectives when you decide you want to look at a case?
That depends. I have encountered over the years mostly receptive detectives. And there's varying degrees of being receptive when we do this work. So there are those who might take a match that I've submitted and let me know, okay, we'll look into that. So that's one form of receptive. That's kind of the bare minimum. Prior to that, there's the non-receptive who don't respond to your email or your phone call. So that's the bare minimum. And then going from there, I've had detectives who are willing to take my match and discuss it with me. I've had detectives who I've contacted about a doe that I was covering in my podcast, and they are willing to say, okay, this is what we've done. This is what we're waiting for. This might be some additional information you can share on your podcast that hasn't been shared otherwise or anywhere else, so that we might get some new leads. So that's a really nice kind of receptive. And then the ultimate is the work that I did with Detective John Dawes on the Cobb County Jane Doe case. He was a homicide and cold case detective in Cobb County for 30 years. He was just retired, and I found his name in an article about the case, and I contacted him on Facebook, and he got back to me immediately, and he's like, yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it. And so we did an interview, and the information he shared led to the case being re-examined by a task force that's connected to Samuel Little. So Samuel Little is a serial killer noted as maybe the most prolific serial killer in the United States, operating from 1970 all the way through the 2000s, was finally arrested in 2014. And he was known to be in Cobb County, Georgia at the time of this doe's death. And so we were able to discuss that in the podcast and really kind of move this case forward by getting it connecting those dots and getting that information into the hands of the right people.
Seems the
Okay.
challenge is really knowing where to start and who to start with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is very, I loved it because my first real experience doing the podcast, I contacted everybody I could. So, I contacted at the GBI, there is a really good forensic artist. Her name is Kelly Lawson. Her mother, Marla Lawson, was the previous forensic artist. She created the reconstruction of the doe that I was covering. And so I reached out to Kelly and I said, Kelly, what can you tell me about this reconstruction? And she said, well, my mother did that and I don't know anything about it, but I can connect you to her. Hold on, I'll get us on a 3-way call. She called me, like she was so willing to help. And I was just like, I was operating then as just an independent researcher who was creating a podcast. I had no credentials other than that. And to have her be so receptive to that and be sure, let's talk to my mom. And so I talked to her. I gleaned a lot of information about, how long did it take her to create the reconstruction? When she told me 13 years had passed before she created that. So after they found the doe 13 years later, she created the reconstruction. That answered a lot of questions on why they could not identify her. But what really puts that in perspective is in our minds, almost like forensic artists, and I don't want to say are a dime a dozen, but we expect that police departments to have forensic artists. Back in 1980s, they did not have them. So that's why there was an initial sketch done at the time of her, when she was located. And that's why it took 13 years, because Marla had just joined the GBI to become the first forensic artist. So you have to put it in perspective. And a lot of times, the public doesn't understand what happened behind the scenes. And they're just like, well, why didn't they get a photo of her and go down to where they thought she may have been working or living and say, do you know this woman? Because that was impossible at the time. So it's very interesting when you start reaching out to people and learning the truth.
So interesting. Well, unless there's any other questions right now, let's let Dana go ahead and think of questions as she's speaking, and probably save them till the end. She'll give us a few minutes at the end to answer questions.
That sounds good. So I wanted to give you kind of like the big picture of how Uncovered came to be. So in order to do that, I have to talk a little bit about just like true crime itself and how society views that today. So let's just say that finding the facts and telling a story is my passion. So this is what I love doing. Not knowing or being able to find information is super frustrating to me. I can't imagine how difficult it is for families of the missing and murdered to face the not knowing day in and day out for years and sometimes decades. Add my empathy for this situation to my desire to uncover the truth. And it makes sense that I would find myself in the true crime space. And I am just one of many people in the United States who enjoy true crime. So according to a survey conducted by YouGov in 2022, 50% of Americans said that they consume true crime. Women, 58%, are more likely than men, 42%, to say they enjoy true crime, and twice as likely to say it's their favorite genre. The demographics of Uncovered subscribers, database users, and community members are a close match to these survey results. So we do find that women are the most likely consumers of our content. But the truth is, our society is fascinated with real life mysteries. And here's some other little tidbits of information that prove that. So in 2020, sales of true crime books grew 75% over the previous year and resulted in a whopping $130 million in revenue. In 2021, there were over 1,800 true crime podcasts available, and there were millions of downloads each month. True crime documentaries are being created and released in record numbers, garnering millions of dollars for streaming services like Netflix, Discovery ID, Paramount Plus, and Peacock. And true crime has fostered vibrant online communities like web sleuths, Facebook pages dedicated to missing and murdered people. The True Crime Reddit subreddit on Reddit has over 1.2 million members, and of course, the Uncovered community. So there is no doubt that people are fascinated by true crime, but the question is why? Is it because it gives us a glimpse into the darker aspects of human psychology and behavior? Do we think we can learn how to avoid becoming a victim if we watch these shows or listen to these podcasts? Do we identify and connect with the victim and their family? I think it can be a little bit of all of these things. And I think the question really for me is this emotional connection what drives the desire of so many of us to want to help the family find justice? And then earlier today, you heard the statistics about finding justice. So in the United States, there are over 200,000 unsolved cases that have gone cold since 1980. That's shocking to me, that number. But recent reports show that that number could be as high as 280,000. So just so we have the semantics correct, I want to tell you what does it mean when a case goes cold. There is no hard and fast definition, but generally speaking, a cold case refers to a criminal investigation, typically a homicide or a serious crime that remains unsolved and without leads for at least 3 years. As the numbers show, it is not unusual for a case to remain cold for several years or even decades. And there are many reasons why this happens. So why are cold cases so hard to solve? There's, like I said, many reasons. Here are just a couple of them. Lack of fresh leads. So once an investigation, let me back up for a second. When I say lack of fresh leads, it's interesting because what I have learned and what has become very clear to me in my research is, that we have these shows like The First 48 Hours, and we now know how important those hours are when it comes to solving a missing persons case or a crime. In the, let's just say 60s and 70s, maybe even prior to that, there were kind of schools of thought about how long we should wait until we take a missing persons report. If they were an adult, we waited longer because, it's their choice. They're allowed to leave. They don't owe anyone an explanation. And so therefore, the police department said 72 hours. Some police departments said a week. Some police departments said, no, we'll take that report right now. So there was no consistency, which I believe led to a lot of the cold cases that we currently have from those timeframes. Because now we know, like I said, how important those first 48 hours are. So when I say lack of fresh leads, they get through the first 48 hours, they don't have any real leads, or they've exhausted all their leads within the first couple months. And now, this case becomes cold because they have a fresh case on their plate. Something new has come in. And so now this is sitting on the back burner, and they can pick it up when they have opportunity. But over the years, we do know that cases keep coming in and cases keep getting cold. Passage of time. So the longer a case remains unsolved, the more difficult it becomes to investigate. And that's because witnesses move, pass away, their recollections are cloudy. They may give, different stories based on that. So now we don't know, what to believe. And also we have some, it's more difficult to environment changes. So something is built where this was once a field or whatever it is. So it's hard to reconstruct these events once there's a passage of time. Limited resources, as I spoke about the manpower dedicated to cold cases, there's a higher priority set on newer cases, current cases, than there is on cold cases. So limited resources get funneled towards current cases. Changing investigative techniques. So the world has changed drastically since my Cobb County Jane Doe, as I call her, was found on the side of the road. There was no DNA testing at the time. She had medical devices implanted, and there's no database at the time. That did not happen until 1993. So these are the things that we don't think about. The forensic artist, it's just another one of those things that we're not always thinking about because we are living today and we look at these cases, even though they're from the 80s, through the eyes of today, through the eyes of today's technology. Now, if that technology didn't exist, then how do we move this cold case to the forefront and say, listen, it needs DNA analysis. It needs fingerprint identification. You need to have someone dedicated to doing that on the force. Not that many police forces across the country have cold case units dedicated to cold cases. So it's a squeeze it in when I can kind of thing. It's where's the funding going to go? If I have a DNA test that needs to be done on a current crime, am I going to put the funding towards that and not towards a cold case? And that is sadly what happens. And then reluctance of witnesses or informants to come back and make additional statements or to be re-interviewed by cold case detectives if they are available. And then the lack of public awareness. So until I started researching the cases of missing people in my area, I had no idea they were missing. You know, does the news cover them? A lot of times a case will get covered on an anniversary and then not covered again until the next year on the anniversary. Do we always get updates on these cases in the media? No. So it's really important to keep these cases in the public eye. So with all of those things in mind, in 2019, our CEO and founder, Jim Brown, decided he wanted to help resolve our nation's cold case crisis, and Uncovered was born. Uncovered helps to move cases forward by providing opportunities for everyday citizens to turn their interest in true crime into action and advocacy. The Uncovered database is the nation's largest cold case database of missing, murdered, and unidentified people. Citizens search our database to find information about the cases that mean the most to them. Our visualized case files contain an overview of the case, a timeline, a map, and links to the sources we use to create the case file. So basically what we're doing is we are gathering all the publicly available information on the internet and in databases like newspapers.com and Ancestry. And then we are putting together, writing a narrative, putting together this case file and making sure that all of this information is in one place. So prior to Uncovered, it would take me a very long time to research a case. I would check those databases I mentioned, newspapers.com and Ancestry. I would look in NamUs. I would also look at all the other websites that we have available to help us. So Web Sleuths, which is a great community as well. It's been around for a really long time. The Doe Network, which has the creator of the Doe Network is considered to be the first citizen detective. He solved a case in 1999. His name is Todd Matthews, and he's kind of like my hero. So he's done some great work in creating this website, and we would use, I would use those types of things. So we pull information from all of pull information from all of those places and then try to, put it together into my podcast. Now that Uncovered exists, that's all in one place. And that makes doing research, sharing a case, talking about a case so much easier. The information that we have, like I said, it is gathered from the internet, but it's crowdsourced data, meaning we engage the public and ask them to help us build our case files. So it's kind of like citizen science, if you've ever heard of that, where so there's all kinds of organizations who engage in activities, including Ancestry, who, if you are looking at your family tree, they will ask you, is this person related to you? And when you click yes, you are actually helping them build information about that person. This is the same thing that we are doing. This is done, like I said, on multiple different platforms. There are from bird watching to the National Archives. You can do this type of work, this crowdsourced information gathering on many different sites. We're the first one that's really saying, you can do it here on our site for crimes and murders and missing people and unidentified people. So we made it kind of easy to do this. So what you will do is you can go to our site, look at a case you're interested in, and you will see a button there that says contribute to a case. You can click on that button and you can add the link. So if you were, as an example, let's say I was just reading an article about the discovery of a purse found in the wall of an abandoned building in Atlanta. And there's an ID in the purse, and it belongs to a woman who has been missing for 10 years. That's a significant detail that should be shared, right? Everybody should know this. Will everybody read that article? Probably not. So what you can do, if this is a case you're interested in, or you just want to help build the database, you head over to the Uncovered database, you find that woman's case file, you click on the contribute to a case button, and you submit the source. So now we have a record of that source. We take that information, we review it, and then we add it to the case file. So we'll add the source link and we'll add the information into the overview of the case. So it's a really cool way for people to get involved who are interested in doing this kind of work. It's very simple. You can do multiple cases. You can, simply focus on, a case that you enjoy. But if you read a lot of true crime and you come across the source and you want to submit it, head on over to Uncovered and hit the contribute to a case button. We also make it easy for users to spread awareness about a case. So we have a share, it's a button that will say share to social. And if you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook or if you're on Instagram, you can share that case file that is already formatted, easily shared, visually perfect. You can go ahead and share that on your Twitter account. You can share it on your Facebook. That's because we want to raise awareness. We want to increase the chances of generating new leads. And we are hoping that it may prompt someone with crucial information to come forward. And then when appropriate, we also include a call to action button. And that means, some of our families have petitions running. They're petitioning for a case that was considered it could be considered a suspicious death and they want it to be considered a homicide. And so they are petitioning for that, or they're petitioning for a new law based on their loved one's case. We also will link to GoFundMe's if someone's trying to fund an exhumation of one of their loved ones, or a billboard, or whatever it is. We will link to that. So we do whatever we can to make it easy for people to find the case and support the family of the victim. And then we have our community. The community is where we connect families to resources and citizen detectives to one another. Our community is made up of advocates, and advocates meaning just people like you and me, but people who are very passionate about this. So advocates who are passionate about research, sharing information, discussing cases, and helping victims' families find answers. Cold cases can take an immense toll on the family, especially if they drag on for years and years and years. We find that, the family may not be getting as much information from law enforcement as they would like. They are, they don't know what path to follow. They want to get the case out into the media, but they don't know how to do it. They are looking, like I said, for funding for a billboard because they think that will provide exposure. I mean, you can only imagine if you were in that position, you would go to the ends of the earth to try to do everything you can to find your loved one. And so Uncovered, like what we do is we create the visualized case file that can be shared, but then we also will connect them with resources. So, oh, you're willing to talk on a podcast about your loved one's case? We have some podcasters that we know that do an excellent job. They're very ethical, victim focused. We'll connect you with one of them and your story can get told. We will share that. We will share your story in our newsletter. We will share it on our social media or your loved one's story. So we are always working to support the families to help them move these cases forward. We even have producers of TV shows who will contact us and say, do you have any families who might be willing to discuss their case on our show? So we are becoming a connector, which I love because I view myself as a connector in life. And so I think it's so important for families to have a place to go so that they can become connected to people who will help them, create a media release, create a press release, whatever it is that they need or want to get done. We have people in our community who are more than willing to help. And then we have the environment of supporting each other. So as researchers, this is very heavy work. You know, we're dealing with people who don't have answers. It's very difficult to get answers. They feel like they've reached dead ends. They don't know where to turn. We're reading horrifying stories of murders and, you know, looking at statistics of missing people and cases of missing people and unidentified people. And it's hard, you know, it's hard sometimes. It's very emotional, it's draining. So we support one another in our research. So we create all sorts of resources that you can use when you're doing your research. We meet up in the community to discuss, you know, I have this problem. Can you help me with this? We have posts in the community where people are like, I can't find this article because I don't have newspapers.com. Can someone find it for me? So there's just a lot of that, along with just discussing the cases or ideas like, how can I get past this wall? We also we're able to recommend resources for if you're filing a FOIA report, a Freedom of Information Act, if you're looking for that kind of information, we are able to provide that. I filed several in my work, and so I can offer my personal experience. We do have some videos that we've created. We also do events where we have, for instance, Detective John Dawes that I mentioned earlier came in and talked about cold case investigation. How did he investigate cold cases? How can you investigate cold cases from just the perspective of a citizen detective? So it's really an amazing environment, and many of our members have gone off to create their own organizations. So Alabama Cold Case Advocacy is an organization in Alabama who tries to help families with anything that they need, from working with the GBI, working with the police department. They find people to interpret cell phone data. Like, they're just making the connections that I was talking about, but they met in our community, and they're still active members of our community, but they're now off really, truly making a difference in Alabama. So we have multiple examples of that. So it's a very exciting time for us. We are, you know, we are adding cases. We are making connections between our members and researchers and helping families. And we also have played a small role in solving one case and in leading, providing information that led to, let's just say, the most potential suspect in 2 cases. And the one case was actually Brandon Lawson out of Texas. And we looked at the cell phone data. We provided that back to the head of the search team so that he could designate areas that he wanted to search. And then we went ahead and connected him to a podcast, 2 podcasters who wanted to be a part of the search team. And they went out and they actually discovered remains. So the remains were discovered. We're still waiting on DNA for confirmation, which it's been over a year, which tells you something about how this works in the backlogs. But they were there when it happened. They covered the story after it happened. And so, you know, we were proud to be able to connect them and have them be on scene and do good in finding remains. So that's one case. The other case is a case, Nancy Eagleson. We were able to bring media. We were able to involve the Porchlight Project out of Ohio to exhume the body. So we connected the family to all of these different people who then were able to, when the body was exhumed, they found a bullet they didn't know about. So they went through and they've been trying to figure out whether or not they can match this bullet to a gun. We did some additional research after a reporter contacted us. He was boots on the ground asking us questions. We were doing the research behind the scenes in newspapers.com and pulling up names and information and all sorts of things. So there is a potential suspect now identified there. And then Cobb County Jane Doe is the case that I covered. And that case resulted in 2 things. One is I submitted my podcast to a woman named Amy Hutzel at the GBI. She is also on the SACI task force, which is the sexual assault kit initiative. And that is, they deal with any sexual crimes. Part of that was trying to match Samuel Little's sketches, because Samuel Little was the serial killer I mentioned earlier. He drew his victims. So trying to match the many sketches he drew, and he says there are 99 women that he was responsible for. But unfortunately, he passed away before we could get all of that rectified. But they rectified, they matched about 53 cases to him. But he would date the sketches and he would say where they were. He had an incredible memory. He had, for detail, when you look at the sketches, you can definitely see the resemblances between the women and the sketch he drew. And so when I took that information, when Amy Hutzel listened to my whole story about this case, and Detective Dawes said the most potential suspect in this case is Samuel Little, she took it to heart and she decided that she was going to submit it to the task force. So in 2020, she submitted the case of the Cobb County Jane Doe to the task force to see if they could find any evidence that connected Samuel Little to her death. And we are actually still waiting for that. COVID got in the way, fresh cases get in the way. And so unfortunately, we're still waiting. But at the same time, I had initially come into this case wanting to identify her. Had been, at the time, it was 36 years. She was unidentified. I couldn't help but think her family was missing her. She was a sister, she was a mother, she was a daughter, whatever she was, and somebody was missing her. And so I reached out to the medical examiner's office and I said, here's a contact. If you contact Othram, we may be able to crowdfund this. We may all be able to pitch in and get this case funded so that you can do the DNA profile and genetic genealogy can lead to her relatives. It ended up that they did do that. And just recently, I received some information on my Facebook page, on my podcast Facebook page, from someone who has been identified as her cousin. So she is going to be identified this year, I'm assuming. They did the confirmation testing on the cousin. And I would imagine she should have her name within this year. So it can happen. And it does happen. It happens every day in this country. Some citizen detective is just finding one little tidbit of information to share that is leading to a solved case. So are there any questions after that ramble?
I have a question. This is Art Kodroff. First comment I just want to make, the website is really good. It's very interesting, very comprehensive. You have a lot of information about the particular cases, as you mentioned. And there are a couple of cases that I'm interested in, and I didn't actually know the names or didn't recall the names. And one of them was the murder in Speedway, Indiana, about 45 years ago. Where 4 young people were murdered, and there's never been an arrest or anything in that case. But the other one that has kind of always been interesting to me is a young lady named Lauren Spearer, who was a 20-year-old college student at Indiana University. And that's a very famous case or very well publicized, certainly, Indiana when it happened. And the thing that was interesting to me is when I looked at it, it said it was June 2011. And I thought, in my mind, I was thinking, well, that was 4 or 5 years ago. It was really 12 years ago. And there's never been anything happen with that case, even though they know who was with her when she went missing and they've refused to cooperate. So part of the thing that was interesting to me was that there's 214 missing cases in Indiana, but really only, a couple of them are really well known. When I scrolled through it and saw the faces, I'm like, I'd never heard of any of these except for Lauren Spearer. And I think that's part of the problem, that they're just not publicized much, or the media has its own resource challenges.
Yes.
Certainly.
Yes. And I think, sadly, it's about views, right? So if it's just a small case that it wasn't initially publicized nationwide or even widely in your local area, then I don't know what the news value is on a very small case that no one really knows about. And that's the sad thing, because this is not news. These are real life people. These are families missing their loved ones. These are, so many, things other than a news story. And so, that we find that very frustrating. We try to put up, if we had a giant staff, I mean, we'd be putting up every case we could get our hands on. We try very hard to make sure there's at least a presence on our website for the cases that people submit. So some of the cases you look at won't have the whole narrative, the timeline, the map, because that case hasn't been fully visualized. But we've had families come to us and say, thank you so much for putting that case card up there. I know she is there, or I know he is there now. And our goal then is to have the public contribute information to those cases. And then we will, be able to go back and fully build out those cases as well. So there are so many, I mean, it is shocking when you really start looking. I think our map is interesting because people like that, because they can click on an area and it's, Indiana, and then it spreads out and you get, each little town that has a case, and you can really look to say, oh my gosh, like that's right next to me. Or, I live there, and you don't have to know the names to see who those people are, which is awesome, because I mean, there's far too many names to remember. And that's the saddest part of all of this.
Exactly, because for the burger chef murders, I just typed in Speedway, and that popped up. That's what happened. It was obviously very famous case, and those 4 young people were my age at the time it happened. I think that's why I've always kind of thought about that case, kind of dating myself, but it certainly bothered me at the time, and it's never been solved.
So Jim, before he decided, that this was the route he was going to take and he was going to create Uncovered, he did some research and found that if you know of a case, or there's it's local to you, that's the biggest drive for people to, kind of like call that their own, or adopt a case, or, find interest in a case. So I think that that's very true. I mean, when I first started, I was looking in Pennsylvania, because at the time I was living in Pittsburgh. And like I said, there were cases all around me and I had no idea.
Any other questions for Dana? Well, I got one for you.
Okay.
Samuel Little, 99 victims, possibly. Where's the second highest? Do we know? Have you uncovered
So, we don't really know, because, we've had serial killers claim huge numbers, but, we can't really prove that. So, I mean, there's probably someone who knows the next highest person. I don't know off the top of my head. And, even Samuel Little's confessions are really good, because he literally dates them. He locates he puts the locations in, and he draws a picture. Yeah. So, tying those cases, there's a new book that's going to be coming out, that is written by a woman by the name of Jillian Lauren. And she actually interviewed him. She did multiple interviews with him. She became almost like, and she hates to say this because it's disgusting to her, but it was for her to be able to find more information about all of these women. And so she had a very long relationship with him up until the time that he passed away in jail. So her book will be coming out, I think, in June. And if you just Google her name, you should be able to find it. Jillian Lauren. I have a pre-copy of it. I just can't remember the name of it right now. It's something monster. But I have a pre-copy of it. It's very good. Like, she'll go through individual cases. She talks about his history. He actually grew up here in Georgia, just south of here. So we can look at, we try not to focus on the serial killer themselves, but we like to focus on the victims when we talk about them. But for me, it's super important to know who he was so that we can connect him to cases. Like, what was his MO? What did he always do? Or what did he sometimes do? Or why did he do what he did? And he traveled across this country. He went from Florida to Georgia to Mississippi, all the way up to Ohio. They even said, I think there might be one Indiana case and then that could be attributed to him. And then he spent a lot of time in California.
Interesting. Kelly did put up a link to that book.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Was there another question?
Yeah, I had a question. I was thinking about part of the Alex Murdaugh case and the lady whose son, she believes he was murdered years ago. And I wonder, you know, when it comes back to the new, you know, and she's trying to get the body exhumed and all this stuff. This was like a cold case and now it's coming back to the forefront. Once it does that, can you still be involved if asked, or could you be of help to her? Or do you have to stay out of it once it gets back in the forefront of things or the limelight?
So this is a really good question, because when the Murdaugh trial was going on, we, as a group, decided, you know, now everybody knew about, I believe his name is, I had it when you were talking, Stephen, maybe.
The young blonde man.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, we visualized his case. So it is up on the site. And then we had to go back in because they changed it from suspicious death to homicide. And so we went back in and we adjusted that. So that's what we can do. And then if she came to us and said, you know what, I feel like we're losing ground. You know, I'm not getting a lot of media coverage. Can you connect me with a podcast, or can you connect me? Of course, we can do those things for sure.
They may not know that you exist. And somebody just posted that his name was Stephen Smith.
Yes.
But she may not even know you exist. If you thought you could be of help, would you reach out to someone like her, or do you have to wait for her to come to you?
So mostly we wait because we do not want to open, like, we don't know where the family stands. So one example is in Pennsylvania, there was a case that I really wanted to cover on my podcast, and I contacted the family. The young girl disappeared in 75. They have never found her. They have been through the ringer. They've done their own work to, you know, collect all this information. They gave it to somebody who they trusted, who was a DA, and that person lost the file. And so the case then is just stuck. I tried to do FOIA requests. They refused to give me any information about the case, even now. And so this family's just tired. They have tried for years. They fought really hard, and they, as a family, decided, they're in their 70s and the older brother's in his 80s. They just can't do it anymore. They don't want the hope roller coaster. Oh, they're going to look into it. Oh, nothing's happening. Oh, the news covered it. Maybe some tips will come in. Nothing happens. They stopped. And I had to, you know, I respected that. So I learned and uncovered suggests that we don't reach out to families. We don't want to open up old wounds. If they reach out to us, we will be more than happy to help. Someone like her, though, because she is so in the forefront with this case and pushing for it, we might share our case file with her, which we may have already done that. So sometimes if it's a really active Facebook page, or we know the family's just screaming for help, we'll just reach out to them and say, we visualized your son's case. Is there anything else we can do to help?
I was going to say, how would she find you? I mean, sometimes folks who aren't on social media a lot may not know that you exist.
Right.
I didn't know till today that you existed.
Yeah, exactly. So
I love crime.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You'll have to spend some time on this site.
Well, that's a good wrap up, because I think several of us were not aware of groups like yourself out there uncovered doing what you're doing. And it's amazing what you do. And I'm sure your background in education, library,
Journalism,
and information science has helped you do that. Well, how about a big thank you to Dana for joining us today? We really do appreciate it. A lot of neat information you're doing, a lot of good work, it sounds like. I'm sure you got a lot of disappointing days and not finding what you're looking for. But in your honor, a donation will be made to a New Shoe Day here in Indianapolis. They are on a mission to uplift the world's well-being. This year, they plan to provide 2,500 new shoe days to Central Indiana youth in under-resourced communities to empower them to move, play, and make friends like kids should. So again, we thank you for joining us. Thank you, members, for being here with us. Until next Thursday, I think at noon, isn't it? No, no meeting. Is there a meeting next Thursday? Kelly?
No meeting next Thursday for the holiday.
Memorial Day weekend. So have a great 2 weeks, everyone. We'll see you after the holidays. Dana, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Kelly, can you
Bye.
do-